This is the Power Break Podcast number 037, an interview with the mayor of the city of Clearwater, Florida, George Cretekos. Hi, I'm Bob Brubaker, inviting you to stay tuned as we seek to give you a little power in this break to help you succeed in the race of life. The Power Break Podcast is a twice-weekly show that provides a discussion show of biblical principles applied to daily life and an interview program featuring stories of perseverance to help you keep pressing on in whatever you're doing in life. Today we're talking with Mayor George Cretekos of the city of Clearwater, Florida, who has persevered in public service for 50 years. Today's interview took place in the mayor's office in Clearwater, Florida. I'm here with Mayor George Cretekos, who is the mayor of Clearwater for how much longer are you going to be mayor?
Until March of 2020, Pastor.
It's going to be a sad day when
thank you. Although there are probably people who are looking forward to that day too, but hopefully not too many of those.
No, I don't think so. You've been a great mayor, but one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was how you have persevered in your career as mayor, and before that with Congressman Young, and you have been in the political realm, as you said, for 50 years.
Yes, sir. Yeah,
I
started in actually in 1968. I volunteered. I was in school and did an internship in a congressional office. And then from that went to the Republican National Convention in 1968. I had just turned 21, and I remember calling my parents and saying I just got asked to go to the convention to help in Congressman Bill Kramer, who was the senior Republican. In fact, he was the only Republican congressman back then for the whole state of Florida. And he was in charge. He was the designated chairman of the convention, and he asked if I would go down and just be a gopher. So I called my folks and I said, "I'm going to the I've been asked to go to the convention, but y'all are Democrats, and I was going to register as a Democrat, but I don't think that that's right for me to register as a Democrat and go to the Republican convention." And so that started my career. And actually what I did, I sit and I laugh about it now, but it's to encourage people that you don't have to start off at the top.
Right.
I was the gopher. My job at the Republican National Convention in 1968 was to drive Mrs. Kramer around to whatever function she wanted to go to. They even gave me a car, and I remember and they took my car away, my 66 Mustang. And I said, "You can't do that. I want my car so that when I'm not doing anything, I can drive my car, not drive this bigger, Mercury, that they had." So that was my exposure, to politics and conventions. They've changed so much, since then. But after that, I went back to school and finished my degree. Mr. Kramer's office and I stayed in touch. When he ran for the United States Senate, I had graduated and received my master's degree, so I came to work in his campaign. He was defeated by Lawton Childs for the United States Senate. And Mr. Young, Bill Young, was elected to take Mr. Kramer's position in the House of Representatives. So I went up to D.C. to help Mr. Kramer and his staff close down their office. When Mr. Young came up in December for an orientation meeting, it was snowing and it was cold, and one of his aides who had come up said, "You know what? I'm not going to move to Florida, from Florida, to come up to D.C." So on Christmas Eve, Congressman Young called me, and he said, "George, would you like to work for me?" I said, "Oh, yes, sir. When do you want me to come to work?" And he said, "Well, I'm going to start work on January the 3rd. So if you want to work for me, you better be in Washington on January the 3rd.
Whoa.
So I quickly packed up my car and left and went up to Washington and started working, for the congressman as a legislative assistant, and did that for 5 years until 1975, 4 years, and came home, switched positions with one of the other aides who was coming up to D.C., and I came down here and effectively worked for him the rest of my career. With one exception, I went back to D.C. for 85 and 86 for a couple of years, and then came back here until I retired in 2007, 2006. I don't even remember past when I retired. But you know,
but you had a good time.
Had you know, hope I did. I remember, you know, it was during, you know, we had the Watergate era. We had when I was first in D.C. I wasn't in D.C. when the congressman was chairman of the Appropriations Committee. I was down here, but I enjoyed working with local people and not getting caught up in the. I mean, Washington is a great place to live. You know, it's a beautiful city. It's probably the center of the universe. But sometimes people forget that it's not the only place in the country.
Oh, yeah.
And so I've always been more interested in local politics and working with people, and I had that opportunity being on his staff here. And
so you persevered for a number of years in that.
Oh yeah. You know, I remember starting to work with him, and even before, my parents and my pastor at St. Nicholas in Tarpon Springs, you know, had kept reinforcing in me the importance of doing the best job that you can do that day. That if you give your best, you try hard, that you're honest, that you are open with people, they will respect you, even if they disagree with you.
Wow, that's a great thing.
And I promised myself that I would try to do that to the best of my ability.
Mm-hmm.
I signed up. I remember signing up for the government retirement program. And I said, well, you know, why am I going to do that? Nobody works on Capitol Hill for 5 years or 10 years. You know, Congressman Young was an exceptional individual. And we had a staff that I think was second to none. I'm prejudiced, obviously, but there were four of us who had been on his staff for at least 20 years.
Oh, my.
And as I said, that's unheard of
Yes.
in D.C. For people not to change jobs. And that's because of the respect, you know, that we had for the congressman for his work, but I also think for how we did our job, that people knew that when they would come to us, that they would get good service, that we would do our best to help them out, and we would stick to it, you know. I know a couple of times, you know, I would tell the guys, Congressman, we can't do that. You know, or, you know, we've got this obstacle. And he said, well, that may be an obstacle today, but tomorrow, turn it around and make sure we get this job to help this individual out.
Wow.
You know, so that, you know, that was important. That was important.
That was good training ground for you now as the mayor of.
Well, it was good training ground whether you become a mayor or whatever. Yeah. Or whatever. Obviously, there are times when you have to say no, and you can't do what your constituent wants. But you have to make the effort. And if you can't help them out, explain to them, you know, why this is a problem today, and it can't be. I have to laugh. I was out of town last week, but I got an email from a gentleman who was mad because we had red light cameras here in Clearwater, and he lives in Tampa. And he got stopped at the one, I guess, up on Belcher Road where we have it. And he said, I will never visit Clearwater again. I said, these red light cameras are wrong. Well, I haven't responded to him yet, but I am going to point out to him that they have a whole lot more red light cameras in Tampa than we have in Clearwater. And, oh, by the way, you're not supposed to run a red light.
There you go.
You know, no matter where you are. You know,
abide by the law, that's not a problem.
Exactly. You know, and that's sometimes it's hard for us to accept that, we want to make exceptions, and I try not to abuse my position and let people think that I'm special, because I'm not special. I may have a title, of mayor, but I jokingly say that if I let it go to my head, I go back home to Tarpon, because some of my parents' friends are still alive, and to them, I'm still Georgie.
I was just going to say. There you go.
Yeah.
Well, take me through the transition then from Bill Young's office to being mayor.
Oh, sure. Okay. When I retired, it was effective in May, and I took June and really didn't do anything. And in July, I started watching the Tour de France every morning. And Carolyn said, my wife said, you really have got to do something. You can't just sit around watching TV, because I don't have any hobbies. I'm not a golfer. I don't bike ride like you do, Pastor. And if I were to try, it would have to be flat and level. And after about a mile, I probably would pass out. But she said, well, you have to do something. And we were talking to some family friends whose cousin was one of my altar boys in Tarpon Springs, and who has now become, well, at the time was the Archbishop of Hong Kong and Southeast Asia. His Eminence has now become the Metropolitan Archbishop of Great Britain. In fact, was just enthroned the weekend of July the 25th, 26th in London. So His Eminence had called and said, well, if you want, why don't you come and help me out? So I thought he meant to come to Hong Kong and, live in Hong Kong and do some office work for him, there. Come to find out that what he really meant was for me to go to a small little community outside of Medan, Indonesia. And when he told me that, it was too late to say, well, no, I've changed my mind. I don't want to come. I felt like I had told him that I would come to help him out. And I packed up my bags and went to Medan. It's interesting. Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world. And here we are in this village outside of Medan, which is a very big city, not living in a rice field, but there were rice fields all around. And I had, a comfortable apartment, but no running water. And it was really strange having to get used to not having running water. Not having air conditioning wasn't all that bad because I grew up without having air conditioning, so that wasn't an issue. But not having running water and not having electricity every time you flipped the switch was difficult.
What a change from Washington, D.C.
It was a change from Clearwater and here, too. We tend to take for granted sometimes some of the advantages that we have. But I said, how can I stay here a month, let alone one day? When I first arrived, because when I saw that I didn't have running water, I just can't tell you, Pastor, how that impacted me.
It'd be a setback.
Yeah, it really was, But I knew I had a job to do, and that was to serve His Eminence, to serve the Lord, to really serve myself. And I persevered.
That's right.
And I made it a point to be as happy as the kids I was working with. Because I was working in a school, helping them with English, helping them learn about government, and helping them learn about orthodoxy. And I realized, these kids, Pastor, they came to school every day wearing the same clothes. And yet, they always had a smile on their face. And it just made you feel good to see these people who had cares that we can't identify with and had worries that we don't necessarily identify with because they're not our worries, but they just made you proud of what you were trying to do. They made you feel good that you were trying to help them. They were eager to learn, and they also taught you, that, hey, you know what? You can make it. Just stick to it.
Wow.
And you will succeed. And that's what I also tried to tell them. If you stick to it, and not let money or not let titles get in your way. If you try to help other people, then you will be successful no matter what you do.
So that they were teaching you as well as you were teaching
Exactly.
Wow. What a great lesson to learn.
It was fantastic. Had to go halfway around the world. In fact, I remember with one of the classes, it was the little, like maybe first or second graders. We pulled out a world, a globe, and said, okay, here we are in Medan. And if you know how the globe has that bar that has the degrees on it, almost 180 degrees opposite was Florida.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that was really preparing you for being mayor?
Then I came back home, and Carolyn said, well, okay, you're not going to go away for another, month. What are you going to do now? And there was a vacancy on the Clearwater City Council. A council member, Mr. Hamilton, in fact, was leaving and had to resign his seat. So I filed to run for his seat and got elected and served on the Clearwater City Council for 5 years. And then in 2012, ran for mayor and was elected and then was reelected 4 years later. So we have term limits here in Clearwater, so I will be out after my 8th year in March of 2020.
What's been a highlight of your career as mayor?
You're probably going to laugh at me, but because I've been involved in the community for such a long time. When I was working with the congressman, I was his face, here in Pinellas County. But working in Clearwater wasn't a priority, and being able to meet all the diverse people here in Clearwater and seeing, and actually, again, learning how much it takes and how much hard work our staff does in making sure that the city runs smoothly. Again, I go back to Indonesia. We had no running water. There were open sewers. We don't. Garbage was just everywhere, but yet nowhere. And we take for granted what it takes for a community, whether it's Clearwater or a big city. It doesn't matter what it takes to make a city run. And being that I've always felt like when I would be invited to an event, they're not inviting me, they're inviting the mayor, they're inviting the city to be there. And I felt like it was my responsibility to attend, getting to meet such a great group of people. We may disagree politically, we may disagree religiously, we may disagree about where you live compared to where I live or whatever, but we can all agree that this is really a great place to call home. It's a place that we've chosen to call home, and together we need to continue to work to keep it a great place.
That's great. One question off the wall. How long have you been wearing bow ties? That's your mark, isn't it?
Yeah, it's become my mark. Pastor, what happened is the Clearwater Dental Clinic, the community dental clinic, had a fundraiser one day called Bow Ties and Blondie, I believe it was. And the idea was that Dean Young, whose dad actually started the Blondie cartoon series, did the promotion for it, and the idea was that those who came had to wear a bow tie. Well, I didn't have a bow tie, but when you got there, they made you take off your tie and put on a bow tie. And I have to admit that people started coming up to me saying, "Oh, you look good in a bow tie. We've never seen you in a bow tie." And I sort of said, "Okay, maybe I don't," because I'm not tall, I'm not good looking. I walk into a room and I'm uncomfortable. I would just as soon sit in the back and be a staffer as opposed to being in the very front row. I'm very uncomfortable in the very front row. In fact, even in church, before I started helping out in the altar, I had this. I had my seat. And I would get upset if somebody came and said, it was in the middle of the congregation, by the aisle, but it wasn't up front or in the back. It was just part of the group. So, but the bow tie, now I stand out, and now if I'm not wearing a bow tie, people will say, "Well, where's your bow tie?" So that's what started it, and I guess a little vanity has probably snuck in, and that's why I continue to do it. I am not comfortable not wearing a tie. One of my colleagues, Mr. Gibson, years ago when he was on council, wanted to know if I went to sleep in a coat and tie because I'm always in one, and that's I'm just more comfortable that way. If I'm not, if I'm not in a coat and tie, then I would just as soon be in shorts and barefoot in a t-shirt. But I don't feel like I represent even though standards have changed. I still hold on to a couple of old traditions.
There you go. Yeah. Classic.
Yeah, well.
Classic tradition.
Yeah.
How has your faith made a difference in you persevering in life?
Those of us who are Orthodox are different. We go to church, and if services aren't 4 hours long, we tend to think that we've gotten cheated. Not that everybody goes for 4 hours, but they're all in. Well, most of the service is still in Greek. There's a lot of tradition, a lot of ritual, but I appreciate the fact that here is a faith and a faith tradition that really hasn't changed since the founding of the church. The creed that was developed in 325, is still part of that service every day. We receive communion in both the body and the blood. We believe that it has been transubstantiated into that. We fast. If you're strict with yourself, the traditions of the church say that you fast on Wednesdays and Fridays. You fast for Lent, and you fast even the first 15 days of August for the falling asleep of the Virgin Mary, which is on August the 15th. That faith, to me, has meant, again, it's a rock because it has evolved, but it is still the same. And it gives me a sense that when everything else may be against you, you can still fall back on something that is there. It was there, it is here, and it will always be here. And the Orthodox, when we celebrate the liturgy, and it is the same service every Sunday, and every liturgy is the same. A couple things changed, the chanting, the hymns of the day, but the basic service is the same. And I never get tired of it, whether it's in Greek or in English.
But the foundation, of course, is
the
Jesus
foundation
Christ.
is there, And again, to go back to your perseverance, it teaches us that, I go back to two scripture readings that keep me going as much as anything. One is Micah, that what does God require of you?
Okay.
To do good, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God.
Right.
And then prior to the start of Lent, we have another period of preparation. And one of the gospel readings is about the tax collector and how he is in the back of the church, not even looking up to God, beating his breast and giving thanks. And the one thing that resonates with me is that no matter what happens to you, give thanks. Because we are blessed. We just don't realize it a lot of times.
Right.
And even when things aren't going well for you, give thanks, walk humbly. And then the psalm, and our numbering is a little different. Those who seek the Lord shall lack of nothing.
Good thing. Yeah.
Okay, or of no good thing. Yeah. And those three things, have been instilled in me, not directly, but just through the repetition of the church, and it has kept me going.
Well, Mayor, it's really been a privilege to interview you and have you on my podcast, and just be able to say how much we appreciate you as the mayor of Clearwater.
Well,
you've been an outstanding mayor, and we're going to hate it when you step down next March, but then again, we look back on the time that you've been here, and you've done a great job.
Well, Pastor, thank you very much. I appreciate more than words can express the confidence that the people of Clearwater and Pinellas County and Congressman Young had put in me to put me in this position of being able to serve. But no matter who you are and no matter what you do, you can inspire somebody. And I look at you. I mean, you have had some health issues, and yet you still are out on your bicycle, going 50, 60, 100 miles, on weekends or during the day. And, I said, gosh darn, that's amazing, And again, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Each one of us can be an inspiration by persevering. And I thank you for your confidence in me and your prayers on my behalf and my families in the cities.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Pastor.
This has been the Power Break Podcast with another story of perseverance to encourage you to keep you pressing on in the race of life. If you would like more information on Mayor George Cretekos, see the city website at www.myclearwater.com. You'll also find information about this website on our show notes at bobrubaker.com and look up the Power Break Podcast. This is show number 037. The Power Break Podcast is a twice-weekly show that provides first a discussion with JT and myself on biblical principles to help you succeed in the race of life, as well as an interview show with stories of perseverance. Please subscribe wherever you have downloaded the podcast, and please leave a rating and a review. Check out today's show notes, books, the Power Break blog, and more at my website, bobrubaker.com, and listen next time for the Power Break Podcast.